My husband, my son, my sister-in-law, and a lawyer I'd never seen before. They were all sitting in my living room when I came home from burying the woman who loved me more than her own children ever did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from the moment I stood in the February rain, watching them lower Frances Margaret Hartwell into the cold Georgia earth. The rain hadn't stopped all morning. It fell in sheets across Oakwood Memorial Cemetery, turning the red Georgia clay into rivers of mud that threatened to swallow my funeral shoes, the only decent pair I owned anymore. I stood at the edge of the grave, clutching a single white rose, Frances's favorite. She used to grow them in the backyard before the Parkinsons made her hands shake too badly to hold the pruning shears. After that, I grew them for her. I'd cut one fresh every Sunday morning and put it in a small vase by her bed so she could see it when she woke up. 12 years. That's how long I'd been caring for Frances. 12 years of 3 a.m. wake-ups to turn her so she wouldn't get bed sores. 12 years of pureed meals and feeding tubes and medication schedules taped to the refrigerator. 12 years of holding her hand through chemotherapy radiation, and finally those last hospice days when every breath was a battle. She fought with the stubbornness of a woman who'd survived the Depression, 3 miscarriages, and a husband who died too young. I was 54 years old. I'd given up my nursing career at 42 to care for her full time, because Thomas, my husband, her son, said his mother deserved family, not strangers. What Thomas actually meant was that hiring help would cost money he'd rather spend in Vegas. But I didn't know that then. I wouldn't know a lot of things until it was almost too late. The pastor finished his prayer. People began to drift away, eager to escape the rain and the reminder of their own mortality. I noticed Thomas and Patricia had already left. I couldn't remember seeing them after the first 5 minutes. Michael, my 26-year-old son, stood near the parking lot, hands in his pockets, looking everywhere except at me. Mrs. Hartwell, I turned. A woman in her late 50s approached, holding an umbrella over both of us. I recognized her, Ruth Ann Bellamy, the hospice nurse who'd been with Frances in those final weeks. I just wanted to say, Ruth's voice cracked, your mother-in-law talked about you every day, every single day. She'd grab my hand and say, Ruth, my Dorothy is an angel. God sent her to me because my own children forgot I existed. I tried to smile, but my face wouldn't cooperate. In 30 years of hospice work, Ruth continued, I've never seen anyone more devoted. She knew honey. She knew what you sacrificed, and she loved you for it. I thanked her. What else could I do? I couldn't tell her that Frances's love felt like the only real thing left in my life, that my husband hadn't touched me in 3 years, that my son had moved to Seattle and called once a month if I was lucky, that I'd become invisible in my own home, seen only when someone needed something cleaned or cooked or fixed. I dropped the white rose into the grave. It landed on the casket with a soft thud, the petals already bruising from the rain. Goodbye, Frances, I whispered. Thank you for seeing me. The drive home took 20 minutes. I spent most of it crying ugly, heaving sobs I'd been holding back for days. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my eyes were swollen and my chest ached like someone had reached inside and squeezed. I noticed the cars first. Thomas's BMW, Patricia's white Lexus, and a black sedan I didn't recognize. Something cold settled in my stomach. I walked up the porch steps, my funeral shoes squelching with every step. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, and froze. Thomas sat in Frances's armchair, the green velvet wingback she'd brought from her mother's house 60 years ago, the chair she'd sat in every evening until she couldn't walk anymore, the chair Thomas had never once sat in while she was alive. He was sitting in it now, legs crossed, face expressionless. Patricia perched on the sofa, still wearing her designer sunglasses despite being indoors. She'd worn them to the funeral, too, claiming the rain bothered her eyes. I suspected she just didn't want anyone to see that she hadn't bothered to cry. Michael hunched in the corner, staring at his hands. And in the armchair by the window sat a man I'd never seen before, thin gray suit, nervous eyes that kept darting toward the door. Dorothy, Thomas said. Not honey, not sweetheart. Just my name spoken like I was a stranger he was meeting for the first time. Sit down. We need to talk. I looked around this room. Every seat was taken except the small ottoman near the fireplace, the lowest seat in the room, the one that would put me below everyone else. I sat anyway. I was too tired to fight about furniture. Can I at least take off my coat? I asked. I'm soaked. This won't take long, Patricia said. Her voice had that clipped, dismissive tone she used with waiters and retail workers, people she considered beneath her. I stayed in my wet coat. Thomas nodded toward the man in the gray suit. This is Gerald Hayes. He's an attorney handling Mother's estate. Gerald Hayes smiled weakly. His hands were trembling slightly as he opened a leather folder on his lap. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, his voice cracking on the first syllable, I'm here to inform you of the contents of Frances Margaret Hartwell's last will and testament. Patricia reached into her designer bag and pulled out a document. I found it in Mom's bedroom, she said, not quite able to hide the satisfaction in her voice. In the drawer with her medications. She began to read. I, Frances Margaret Hartwell, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath my estate as follows. To my son Thomas Raymond Hartwell, I leave the house at 247 Magnolia Drive, as well as all funds in my savings account, totaling approximately $480,000. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the ottoman. To my daughter, Patricia Ann Hartwell Jennings, I leave my jewelry collection and personal effects. Patricia smiled. The jewelry alone was worth at least $50,000. To my daughter-in-law, Dorothy Elizabeth Hartwell. Patricia paused, savoring the moment. I leave the sum of $5,000 in recognition of her service. Service. The word hit me like a physical blow. 12 years of my life reduced to a single word. Service. Like I'd been the maid. The hired help. Someone who showed up, did a job, and got paid. $5,000. I did the math automatically. My nurse's brain couldn't help it. $5,000 divided by 12 years. Divided by 365 days. Divided by the countless hours I'd spent bathing her, feeding her, holding her when she cried, staying awake through the night so she wouldn't be alone. Less than $1.15 per hour. This isn't right, I heard myself say. Frances told me, Mom was on a lot of medication, Thomas interrupted smoothly. She wasn't always clear about things toward the end. She was clear. My voice came out stronger than I expected. She was very clear. She told me the house would be mine. She said it was only fair after everything. Well, this is what the will says. Patricia tapped the paper. Black and white, witnessed and notarized. Gerald Hayes cleared his throat. Additionally, Mrs. Hartwell, I've been asked to inform you that you have 48 hours to vacate the premises. The room went silent. Even Thomas had the decency to look away. 48 hours, I repeated. The family feels it's best to make a clean break. Gerald said, his eyes fixed on his folder. After that, if you haven't left voluntarily, we'll be forced to file for eviction. I looked at my son. Michael? He wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad says this is what Grandma wanted. He mumbled. I'm sorry, Mom. I thought you were just upset about losing her. I didn't know. Didn't know what? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like water, but I refused to let them see me fall. 25 years of marriage. 26 years of motherhood. 12 years of sacrifice. And this was what it came to, being thrown out of my own home while my husband sat in his dead mother's chair like a king on a throne. I understand, I said. They all looked surprised. I think they expected screaming, tears, begging. But 12 years of nursing had taught me something important. You can't fight every battle when it happens. Sometimes you have to wait. You have to assess. You have to plan. I walked upstairs without another word. I packed slowly, methodically. My nursing scrubs, I hadn't worn them in over a decade, but I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. The small jewelry box Frances had given me for my 50th birthday. The photo albums Thomas wanted to throw out because everything's digital now. And the envelope. 3 days before she died, Frances had one of her clear moments. The morphine fog lifted, and suddenly she was there, really, there looking at me with eyes that saw everything. Dorothy, she'd whispered, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. My children are not good people. I know that now. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Don't say that, I'd told her, smoothing her hair. They're just busy. Don't defend them. Her voice was sharp. You've always defended everyone else. It's time someone protected you. She'd pulled an envelope from under her pillow, yellowed, creased like she'd been keeping it for a while. Don't open this until after I'm gone. Promise me. I'd promised. Now I stood in a $45 a night motel room surrounded by everything I owned in 2 suitcases, holding that envelope in my hands. The neon sign outside flickered red through the thin curtains. The heater rattled. The sheets smelled like cigarettes and industrial detergent. I opened the envelope. Inside was a key, small brass with a tag attached, First National Bank, Box 1247, and a note written in Francis's shaky handwriting. Dorothy, I know my children. I prepared for this. The real will is in the box. Video recording too. All the evidence you'll need. Call Harold Morrison at Morrison & Associates. His number is in the box. I'm so sorry you have to deal with this. You deserve so much better from all of us. With love, Francis. I read it 5 times. Then I really cried for the first time since the funeral. Not from sadness, from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming realization that even in death, Francis was still protecting me. The next morning, I walked into First National Bank with trembling hands and a heart full of desperate hope. The safety deposit box was small, maybe 12 inches long, but what it contained was enough to change everything. A will, official notarized, dated June 15th of the previous year, a USB drive, a thick folder labeled Evidence, and a business card, Harold James Morrison, attorney at law. I opened the will first. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read the words. I leave the house at 247 Magnolia Drive to my daughter-in-law, Dorothy Elizabeth Hartwell. I leave $400,000 to Dorothy Elizabeth Hartwell. I leave $25,000 each to Thomas Raymond Hartwell and Patricia Ann Hartwell Jennings on the condition that they do not contest any portion of this will. If they do, they forfeit their entire inheritance. I sat there, stunned, tears streaming down my face. Then I opened the evidence folder, and my blood ran cold. Printed emails. Between Thomas and Patricia. Dated April 3rd, 2021, 2 years before Francis died, when she was still walking, still talking, still very much alive. The subject line read, RE Inheritance Plan. Thomas had written, Mom won't last long with her condition. We need to prepare. I've found someone who can handle the paperwork. Patricia replied, What about Dorothy? She won't go quietly. And Thomas's response, the one that made me want to vomit, was this. Dorothy is too naive. She'll believe whatever we tell her. She always does. 2 years. For 2 years, while I was changing his mother's bedpans and holding her hand through chemotherapy, my husband had been planning to steal everything from me. And he'd called me naive. Maybe I was. Maybe I had been. But not anymore. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on Harold Morrison's card. Mr. Morrison, I said when he answered. My name is Dorothy Hartwell. Francis told me to call you. Mrs. Hartwell. His voice was warm, professional. I've been expecting your call. Can you come to my office this afternoon? We have a lot to discuss. I looked at the folder in my lap, the emails, the evidence, the proof that my husband was not just a liar, but a thief who'd been planning this for years. Yes, I said. I'll be there. Harold Morrison's office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building downtown right above the bakery that used to make the cinnamon rolls Francis loved back when she could still swallow solid food. I climbed the narrow staircase, clutching the folder of evidence against my chest like a shield. The smell of fresh bread and cinnamon drifted up from below, and for a moment I was back in Francis's kitchen, watching her frost a birthday cake for Michael's 5th birthday, humming hymns under her breath. That woman, the one who hummed while she baked, who grew white roses and read mystery novels and laughed at her own jokes, that woman had known her children would betray me. And she'd spent the last 18 months of her life making sure I'd survive it. The door to Morrison & Associates was solid oak with a brass nameplate that had turned green with age. I knocked twice. Come in. Harold Morrison was not what I expected. 72 years old according to the diploma on his wall, but he moved like a man 20 years younger. Small and wiry, with silver hair combed back from a weathered face and gold-rimmed glasses perched on a nose that had clearly been broken at least once. He wore a 3-piece gray suit that looked older than I was, and when he shook my hand, his grip was firm and dry. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his desk. Please sit. I've been waiting for this meeting for quite some time. You knew I'd come. Francis told me you would. He settled into his own chair and folded his hands on the desk. She said when Dorothy calls Harold, tell her everything. She deserves to know what her husband really is. Hearing Francis's words in someone else's voice made my throat tighten. How long did you know her? 43 years. I handled her husband's estate when he passed. After that, she'd come to me whenever she needed legal advice. He paused. She came to me 18 months ago with a very specific request. She wanted to rewrite her will, and she wanted to make sure it was ironclad. 18 months, I repeated. That's when she was diagnosed with cancer. Yes, but that's not why she came. Harold opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder twin to the one I'd found in the safety deposit box. She came because she'd discovered something about Thomas. He slid a document across the desk. Bank statements. Francis's savings account. I scanned the columns of numbers, not understanding what I was looking at until I did. Withdrawals. Dozens of them. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, 15,000 in a single day. $127,000, Harold said quietly. That's how much Thomas stole from his mother over the past 3 years. The room swayed. I gripped the armrests of my chair. He disguised them as medical expenses, Harold continued. But Francis kept meticulous records. None of those withdrawals match any hospital bills or pharmacy receipts. They do, however, match deposits at 3 different casinos in Las Vegas. Gambling? I whispered. He told me those trips were for work conferences. Your husband has a gambling addiction, Mrs. Hartwell. Our investigator estimates his total debt at approximately $180,000. Patricia isn't much better. She's nearly $100,000 in credit card debt. That influencer lifestyle doesn't pay as well as she pretends. I thought about all the times Thomas had said we couldn't afford a vacation. All the times he'd complained about Francis's medical bills. All the times I'd skipped buying new clothes or getting my hair done because we needed to tighten our belts. Meanwhile, he'd been bleeding his dying mother dry to feed his addiction. He was stealing from her while I was taking care of her, I said. The words tasted like ash. While I was changing her sheets and giving her medications and sitting up with her all night, he was stealing her money. Yes. Harold's voice was gentle but unflinching. And that's not just theft, Mrs. Hartwell. Under Georgia law, that's elder financial abuse. It's a felony. If we pursue this, Thomas could face 10 to 15 years in prison. 10 to 15 years. I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded like the Dorothy I used to be, the naive Dorothy, the trusting Dorothy, whispered that this was my husband, the father of my child, the man I'd loved for 25 years. But that man had called me naive, had planned to throw me out on the street, had sat in his dead mother's chair and watched me lose everything without a flicker of remorse. What do I need to do? I asked. Harold smiled a small, grim smile of someone who'd seen too much of human nature to be surprised by anything. First, he said, you need to watch this. He turned his laptop toward me and pressed play. Francis appeared on screen, sitting in the very chair I now occupied. She wore the blue cardigan I'd given her for Christmas 2 years ago. She'd said it was the softest thing she'd ever owned. Her pearl necklace caught the light. Her hair was neatly combed, her lipstick carefully applied. She'd wanted to look her best for this. I am Frances Margaret Hartwell, she said, her voice thin but steady. I am of sound mind, though my body isn't what it used to be. A small smile. I'm making this video to ensure my wishes are crystal clear and cannot be misinterpreted or manipulated by anyone. She folded her hands on the table, the same gesture she used to make when she was about to say something important. My son Thomas and my daughter Patricia have not been present in my life for many years. They visit on holidays and birthdays, stay for an hour and leave. They call once a month if I'm lucky. They've made it clear that caring for me is a burden they're unwilling to carry. Her voice cracked slightly. She paused, took a breath, and continued. My daughter-in-law, Dorothy Elizabeth Hartwell, has been my sole caregiver for 12 years. She's bathed me, fed me, held my hand through procedures and pain that would have broken most people. She's sacrificed her career, her health, and sometimes her dignity to preserve mine. Frances looked directly into the camera. It felt like she was looking directly at me. Dorothy deserves everything I have to give. The house should be hers. She's earned it 1,000 times over. The money should be hers. It won't make up for what she's given, but it's all I have. She paused again. I'm leaving my children something because they are my children, and I do love them despite everything. But if they choose to fight, this will, if they try to take from Dorothy what she's rightfully earned, then they'll get nothing. That is my final word on the matter. The video ended. The screen went dark. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, unable to speak. Harold handed me a tissue. "There's more," he said gently. Francis documented everything. Journals of every missed visit, every broken promise. Testimonies from the hospice nurses. Financial records showing you paid for many of her medications out of pocket when Thomas claimed the insurance wouldn't cover them. "I didn't keep track," I said numbly. "I just did what needed to be done." Francis kept track. Harold's voice was soft. "She knew you wouldn't. She knew you'd never fight for yourself, so she fought for you." I spent the next week preparing. Harold filed the real will with probate court and sent official notification to Thomas and Patricia. The police opened an investigation into the forged will and the financial abuse. I stayed in my motel room waiting, planning, trying not to think about the fact that my entire life had been a lie. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Mrs. Hartwell." The voice was male, nervous, slightly familiar. "Please don't hang up. This is Gerald Hayes, the lawyer from your living room." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you. In person. There are things you need to know, things that can help you." "Why would you help me?" "You helped them throw me out of my house." Silence. Then, "Because Thomas Hartwell owes me $10,000 for that little performance. He paid me $3,000 up front and promised the rest after everything was settled. But I just found out he has no intention of paying. And if this thing blows up, which it's about to, I'm the one who's going to prison for forgery, not him." I should have hung up. Every instinct told me this was a trap. But something in his voice, the fear, the desperation, sounded genuine. "Where?" I asked. "Waffle House on Route 9. 1 hour. Gerald Hayes looked worse than I felt. He sat hunched in a corner booth wearing a black hoodie, his eyes red-rimmed and darting toward the door every few seconds. When he saw me, relief flooded his face. "Thank you for coming," he said as I slid into the seat across from him. "I know you have no reason to trust me." "You're right, I don't. So talk fast." He took a shaky breath. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not even a paralegal anymore. I lost my license 5 years ago for fraud. Thomas found me through a guy he knows from the casino circuit. Paid me to put on a suit and read from a script. The 48 hours to vacate. That was all Thomas. He wanted to scare you, make you run before you had time to think." Gerald laughed bitterly. "He said you were soft, said you'd cry for a few days and then disappear. He didn't think you'd fight back. He underestimated me." "Yeah, he did." Gerald reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. "This is a recording of a meeting between Thomas and Patricia, 1 week before the funeral. I was there, they didn't know I was recording." My hand trembled as I took the drive. "What's on it?" "Thomas says Mom won't make it past the weekend. We need to move fast. Patricia asks about you. Thomas says," he swallowed. "He says Dorothy won't be a problem. She spent 12 years being a doormat. She's not going to stop now." A doormat. That's what he thought of me. 12 years of devotion, and I was nothing but a doormat. "There's more," Gerald continued. "They talk about the fake will, how Patricia found a guy online who could forge Francis's signature, how they practiced what to say to you, how they were going to sell the house and split the money. And you're giving me this because I'm not going to prison for those people." His voice cracked. "I've done bad things, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm not pretending to be a good person, but I'm not taking the fall for Thomas Hartwell's scheme. He used me just like he used you, just like he used his own mother." He slid a handwritten statement across the table signed "Dated Witnessed." "My full confession. Everything I know. Names, dates, how they planned it. Give it to your lawyer. Give it to the police. I don't care anymore. I just want out." I looked at Gerald Hayes, this small, desperate man who'd helped destroy my life and was now trying to save himself by helping me. "Why should I believe you're not setting me up on—" "Because if I was, I wouldn't be telling you about the recording." He met my eyes for the first time. "Listen to it. You'll know I'm telling the truth." I tucked the USB drive and the statement into my purse. "Thank you," I said. Not warmly, I couldn't manage warm, but sincerely. Gerald nodded. "I hope you destroy them, Mrs. Hartwell. I really do." He stood up and walked out into the night without looking back. I listened to the recording that night. Every word was exactly as Gerald described and worse. Hearing my husband's voice so casual and confident discussing how to steal from his dying mother and discard his wife of 25 years, it broke something inside me. Or maybe it fixed something. I wasn't sure which. The next morning I gave everything to Harold. He contacted the police. Detective Sarah Carpenter, a sharp-eyed woman about my age who seemed personally offended by what Thomas had done, took my statement and promised to move fast. That night my phone rang again. Michael. Mom? His voice was high, panicked. I just talked to Dad. He says you're suing the family. He says you manipulated Grandma when she was sick to change her will. He says, Michael. I cut him off. Do you believe that? Silence. I don't know what to believe anymore. Then don't believe anyone. Look at the evidence yourself. I'm going to send you a video your grandmother made and some emails your father wrote 2 years ago. Read them. Watch them. Then decide. Mom, I love you, Michael. I've loved you since the moment you were born, and nothing will ever change that. But I'm done being the person everyone underestimates. I'm done being the doormat. Your grandmother saw who I really am. It's time everyone else did too. I hung up and sent him everything. Then I sat in my motel room watching the neon sign flicker red through the curtains and waited for the world to change. 3 days later, I stood on the sidewalk across from 247 Magnolia Drive and watched them arrest my husband. Detective Carpenter had called me the night before. We're moving tomorrow morning, she'd said. I thought you might want to know. Some people need to see it happen. Some people don't. No judgment either way. I'd stayed awake all night debating. Part of me wanted to be there, needed to be there to watch the man who'd called me naive and a doormat face the consequences of his actions. Another part of me, the part that still remembered the young man who'd proposed under the oak tree in Piedmont Park 25 years ago, wanted to stay far away. In the end I went. Not for revenge, for closure. The February morning was cold but clear, the first sunny day since Francis's funeral. I parked my car down the block and walked to a spot where I could see the front porch without being too close. The house looked the same as always, white siding, green shutters, the bare branches of the magnolia tree reaching toward the pale blue sky. Francis had planted that tree the year Michael was born. She'd said every child deserved a tree to climb. At exactly 7:15 a.m., 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb. 4 officers got out. They walked up the front steps in formation, and one of them knocked on the door. Thomas answered in his pajamas, coffee cup in hand. I watched his face change confusion, then recognition, then a pale, sickening fear that made him look 20 years older in an instant. They read him his rights. They put him in handcuffs. And just before they led him down the steps, he turned his head and saw me standing across the street. Our eyes met. 25 years of marriage. 25 years of shared meals and shared beds and shared silences. 25 years of me believing I knew who he was. I didn't look away. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I just felt tired and sad and ready for it to be over. They put him in the back of the cruiser. The door slammed shut. And Thomas Raymond Hartwell, the man who'd stolen from his dying mother and thrown his wife out like garbage, was driven away in the morning light. Patricia was arrested at the same time at her apartment in Atlanta. According to Detective Carpenter, she'd been in the middle of filming an Instagram story about her morning self-care routine when the officers knocked. The video cut off mid-sentence. Her 200,000 followers never found out what happened next. Well, they would eventually. Everyone would. The trial began 3 months later in the county courthouse downtown. I'd driven past that building hundreds of times over the years without ever going inside. Now I walked through its marble corridors like I belonged there. Because I did. This was my story. My justice. My day. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Nothing like the grand chambers you see on television. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, an American flag hanging limply in the corner. It smelled like old paper and anxiety. Thomas sat at the defendant's table with his court-appointed lawyer. He couldn't afford a private attorney anymore. The gambling debts had eaten through everything, and his assets were frozen pending the outcome of the case. He wore a gray suit I didn't recognize, cheaper than anything he'd owned during our marriage. No Rolex, no designer tie, just a middle-aged man in a bad suit waiting to learn his fate. Patricia sat beside him looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No Gucci sunglasses today, court rules. For the first time in years, I could see her eyes clearly. They were red-rimmed, darting around the room like a trapped animal's. Michael sat in the gallery alone in the middle row. Not next to his father, not next to me. Somewhere in between which was exactly where he'd been throughout this whole ordeal. Harold Morrison stood at the plaintiff's table, straight-backed and calm. 72 years old, and he moved through that courtroom like a general surveying a battlefield he'd already won. "The prosecution calls for video evidence to be presented," he announced. The judge nodded. A screen was wheeled out, the lights dimmed, and Frances appeared. She was sitting in Harold's office, wearing her blue cardigan and her pearls. Her hair was neatly combed. Her eyes were clear and sharp, the eyes of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and why. "I am Frances Margaret Hartwell," she said, "of sound mind, though my body isn't what it used to be." The courtroom was silent. Even Thomas had stopped fidgeting. Frances spoke for nearly 10 minutes. She talked about the years of neglect from her children, the sacrifices I'd made, the love she felt for me, the daughter-in-law who'd become more of a daughter than her own flesh and blood. Then she said the words I'd been waiting for. "I want to add something else," Frances continued, her voice growing stronger. "For whoever is watching this, maybe a courtroom, maybe my family, maybe both." She looked directly into the camera. "My son Thomas is a thief. He's been stealing from my accounts for 3 years, thinking I was too old and too sick to notice. But I noticed. I documented every single withdrawal." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Patricia made a small, strangled sound. "My daughter Patricia is a liar. She tells me she loves me, but she can't remember my birthday. She visits twice a year and spends the whole time taking pictures of herself in my house for her followers." Frances paused. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with grief. "And I am a failure as a mother. I raised them wrong. I gave them too much and taught them too little. I let them become the people they are, and I will carry that guilt to my grave." She took a shaky breath. "But Dorothy is not my daughter by blood, and she is the best person I know. What does that tell you? Maybe blood doesn't matter as much as we think. Maybe what matters is who shows up, who stays, who does the hard work of loving someone even when it's thankless and exhausting and breaks your heart." The video ended. The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, I heard something I never expected to hear. Thomas was crying. Not the performative tears of a man trying to win sympathy. These were real tears, ugly heaving sobs that shook his whole body. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Thomas didn't seem to notice. He was staring at this blank screen where his mother's face had been, and for the first time I think he understood what he'd lost. Patricia reacted differently. She shot to her feet, face twisted with rage. "She had no right," she started to shout. Her lawyer yanked her back down. The judge banged her gavel. Order was restored, but the damage was done. Everyone in that courtroom had seen who Thomas and Patricia really were. Not because I'd told them, because Frances had. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Thomas was convicted of forgery, fraud, and elder financial abuse. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in state prison, reducible to 3 with good behavior. Patricia was convicted of conspiracy to commit forgery and fraud. She received 18 months, reducible to 12. Gerald Hayes, true to his word, had cooperated fully with the prosecution. His testimony corroborated everything. In exchange, he received 6 months of probation and 200 hours of community service. I saw him in the hallway after the verdict, looking like a man who'd barely escaped drowning. "Thank you," I said to him. He shook his head. "Don't thank me, Mrs. Hartwell. I didn't do it for you. I did it to save myself." "I know," I said, "but it helped me anyway, and I hope you find a way to be better than you were." He didn't respond. He just walked away, shoulders hunched, disappearing into the crowd of lawyers and reporters and curious onlookers. The house was mine. The $400,000 was mine. Michael's trust fund remained intact, accessible when he turned 27. Thomas and Patricia, by contesting the will, had forfeited their inheritances entirely. $25,000 each gone. All they had left was prison time and ruined reputations. I walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sunshine and took my first breath as a free woman. 1 week later, I unlocked the front door of 247 Magnolia Drive and stepped inside. The house smelled the same wood-polished dried flowers and something indefinably Frances. I stood in the foyer for a long moment, letting it wash over me. This was my home now, legally, officially, irrevocably. But it was also the place where I'd spent 12 years sacrificing everything. The place where I'd been betrayed. The place where I'd been seen, truly seen, by a woman who was no longer here to see anything at all. I walked through the room, slowly touching familiar surfaces. The kitchen counter where I'd prepared thousands of meals. The living room windows where Frances used to watch the birds. The staircase I'd climbed countless times in the middle of the night, responding to her calls. I found Michael in the backyard, sitting on the porch steps, staring at the bare rose garden. "Mom!" He stood up quickly, shoving his hands in his pockets. "I didn't know if you'd want me here. I can leave if stay," I said. We stood there in awkward silence. This was my son, the baby I'd held in my arms 26 years ago, the toddler who'd called me Mama, with such joy, the teenager who'd slowly pulled away the young man who'd believed his father's lies. "I'm so sorry," he finally said. His voice cracked. "I should have asked you. I should have questioned Dad. I should have visited Grandma more. I should have—" "Michael," I stepped closer to him. "You were 26 years old and you'd been manipulated by your father your entire life. You believed what he told you because that's what children do. I understand that. But I should have known better. I should have seen." "Yes," I said quietly. "You should have. But you didn't. And now you do." He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" I reached out and touched his face, the same gesture I'd used when he was small and frightened of thunderstorms. "I forgave you before you asked," I said. "That's what mothers do." He broke down then, sobbing like the little boy he used to be. I held him in the garden where Frances's roses would bloom again in spring, and I let him cry. 6 months later, I went to see Thomas. I hadn't planned to. After the trial, I told myself I was done with him, that I'd said everything that needed to be said, that there was nothing left between us but paperwork and painful memories. But then I found the letter. I was cleaning out Frances's bedroom, something I'd been putting off for months, when I discovered it in the back of her nightstand drawer. A sealed envelope yellowed with age, with a single word written on the front in Frances's shaky handwriting. Thomas. She'd written to her son but never sent it, never given it to him, just kept it hidden away, waiting for what the right moment, a change of heart, I didn't know. I held that envelope for 3 days before I decided what to do. The prison visiting room was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined. Plastic chairs, fluorescent lights, the smell of industrial cleaner and despair. Guards stood at every corner, watching everything with bored professional eyes. Thomas came in wearing orange instead of gray. He'd lost weight. His hair had gone almost entirely white. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Surprised confusion, maybe a trace of hope. "Dorothy." He sat down across from me, the table between us like a barrier. "I didn't think you'd ever come." "Neither did I." Silence stretched between us. 25 years of marriage reduced to 2 strangers with nothing left to say. "Did you come to gloat?" he asked. Not angry, just tired. "No." I reached into my purse and placed the envelope on the table. "I came to give you this. Your mother wrote it. I don't know when and I don't know what it says. I never opened it." Thomas stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "I don't want it." "That's your choice. But these are the last words your mother ever wrote to you. She loved you, Thomas. Despite everything you did. Despite who you became. She loved you until the very end." I pushed the envelope toward him. "I think you should read it." He didn't touch it. "Why are you doing this?" His voice was hoarse. "After everything I did to you, why would you bring me this?" I thought about it. I'd asked myself the same question 100 times on the drive here. "Because your mother taught me that people are more than the worst things they've done," I said finally. "You did terrible things, Thomas. Unforgivable things. And I don't forgive you. I want to be clear about that. I'm not sure I ever will." I stood up. "But you're also the man who proposed to me under the oak tree in Piedmont Park. You're Michael's father. You're Frances's son. And whatever she wrote in that letter, she thought you deserved to read it." I paused at the door. "So read it. Not for me. For her." I walked out. The roses came back in spring just as I knew they would. White ones, Frances's favorite, blooming in the garden where she used to sit on good days, her face turned toward the sun. Michael helped me plant new bushes along the fence, a project we'd been working on every weekend for months. He'd moved back to Georgia after the trial, taking a job at a tech company in Atlanta. He visited every Sunday now. We were learning how to be mother and son again, one conversation at a time. The house had changed. brighter curtains, new furniture in the living room, a fresh coat of paint in the kitchen. I'd turned Frances's old bedroom into an office for Frances's House, a non-profit I'd founded to support family caregivers. We offered resources, respite care, legal advice, counseling. All the things I'd wished I'd had during those 12 long years. "Mom," Michael looked up from the rosebush he was planting. "Do you think Grandma would be proud of what you've done?" I smiled, wiping dirt from my hands. "I think she'd say that's exactly what I expected from you all along." That does sound like her. That night after Michael left, I sat alone in the living room with a cup of tea and the photo album I'd saved from Thomas's trash pile. I flipped through the pages slowly, Frances as a young mother holding baby Thomas. Frances and her husband on their wedding day. Holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays that had seemed unremarkable then, but were precious now. At the very back of the album, I found one last note. Frances's handwriting faded but legible. "Dear Dorothy, if you're reading this, then my plan worked. You're home. You're safe. You're finally receiving what you deserved all along. I'm giving you something now. Permission. Permission to stop sacrificing. Permission to stop shrinking. Permission to take up space and demand respect and know your worth. You've been the architect of everyone else's comfort for too long. Now build something for yourself. With all my love, Frances." I held that note for a long time, tears streaming down my face. Not sad tears, something more complicated. Grief, yes, but also gratitude, also peace, also something that felt very much like freedom. I wasn't the doormat anymore. I wasn't the naive wife or the invisible caregiver or the woman who swallowed her own needs so everyone else could be comfortable. I was Dorothy Elizabeth Hartwell, 55 years old, owner of a 4-bedroom house with a rose garden, director of a nonprofit serving caregivers across 3 counties, mother to a son who was learning what it meant to show up. And I was a woman who had been loved, truly deeply loved by someone who'd seen me clearly enough to fight for me even after death. That was worth more than any inheritance. But the house was nice too.